good news in a way this morning, very good news, and also, you know, still nail-biting, edge of the cliff. They call it cliff edge diplomacy almost, because 17 hostages who have been held by Hamas were freed last night in the end, after hours of delay raised fears that the truce deal between Israel and Hamas would actually fall through.
And those released include 9-year-old Irish-Israeli girl Emily Hand.
Her father, Thomas, was told, if you remember, he was told she had died in the October 7th attack on Kibbutz Be'eri. Do you remember? She was there because she was doing an overnight stay with a best friend. And so she wasn't with her dad in what would have been probably safety at the time. She was staying in the kibbutz with a friend. And so she fell to the attack. He had this reaction at the time.
I went, yes! I went, yes, and smiled, because that is the best news of the possibilities that I knew.
I just find that so overwhelming. But now, after 7 weeks in captivity, Emily has been reunited with her father, who relentlessly campaigned for her release after learning she was alive.
And other survivors of the same massacre at the Kibbutz Be'eri were among the 13 Israelis and the 4 Thai hostages who arrived back in Israel in Red Cross vehicles last night.
And this is the second release of hostages from Hamas captivity, totalling 26 in exchange for 78 Palestinian prisoners.
Let's talk this morning to Jotam Confino, who's in Tel Aviv. Jotam, it's good to talk to you because at last, after a terrible day yesterday, at last they did release more hostages. But it was nail-biting, wasn't it? I mean, we didn't know whether the truce had completely gone wrong.
No, I was waiting at the hospital where the hostages were supposed to be treated, really, and people didn't know what was going on. All the security personnel on the ground, everyone was confused. The family that was waiting inside the hospital were just losing it, really. And eventually we got news that Qatar had managed to put enough pressure on Hamas to go through with this deal. And it was such a last-minute psychological terror move by Hamas, really, because what they claimed was that Israel didn't live up to its part of the ceasefire by allowing humanitarian aid to go into the northern part of the Gaza Strip. But to withdraw at the very last minute, it can only be seen as a psychological move. They knew exactly how much is at stake for Israel as a nation, and in particular for the families that were waiting anxiously for their loved ones to come back.
And do you think, Jotam, politically this will change things? Because there's been a lot of pressure from the United Nations, from other political parties around the world to go for a more permanent ceasefire. If this is what a ceasefire looks like, with freedom and joyous reunion, will that become more of a play? Or do you think Benjamin Netanyahu will have to keep his resolve? He said all along this won't end until Hamas is eradicated.
Every person in Israel says the same thing. Hamas has to be wiped out. There will be no ceasefire, no long-term ceasefire, no peace deal with Hamas. This is just a temporary ceasefire. And the minute that Israel assesses that it cannot get any more out of Hamas in terms of deals, it will attack them again. And it will try to extract the remaining hostages by force. It's an illusion to think that Hamas will remain in Gaza and to govern. Any government in Israel, whether it be this one or a new government following an election, no government will be able to convince the public that it's okay to allow Hamas to stay in power. So we're really just looking at a pause here, and we're waiting for a full-on war anytime soon, really.
People, though, that although this is a humanitarian pause and at the moment hostages are being freed, that Hamas still have the upper hand, don't they? I mean, we saw it yesterday. If they insist, or they think they've got a way of insisting that the truce is falling and that Israel isn't abiding by what they see as the truce, they can hold back on hostages. This could go on day by day and go on for a very long time, couldn't it?
Yeah.
It could. And that's always the case in hostage situations. Whoever keeps someone hostage, and in particular when you keep children hostage, you have the upper hand. It's quite simple. Now, had it been soldiers that Hamas had kept, it would be different. Israel would not agree to the same terms. It would likely just continue to attack Hamas and try to extract them themselves. But when you're talking about children, there is a huge responsibility as a government, as a nation, to do everything you can to get them out, even if it means giving Hamas a room to breathe, even if it means releasing Hamas members from Israeli prisons, which is also going to happen in the coming days. So it's really a dilemma that no government could get out of. Any government in this situation would have to basically play by the rules of the hostage keeper.
And the deal, right, is for a day of ceasefire for each 10 hostages released, as I understand it, 17 so far. The pressure will mount for that ceasefire to continue. But, of course, Hamas won't sit around playing cards, will they? They'll be regrouping. And they have one mission, and that is to eradicate the state of Israel, to eradicate the Jewish people.
Exactly. The longer this war goes on, the more Hamas is winning. The entire world, and I'm not talking about the leaders now, I'm talking about public opinion. Public opinion is very much against Israel. People have forgotten about October 7th. They see the suffering in Gaza as the main priority. So sympathy lies with Gaza, really. And you also see it in the way that it's covered in the media. Yesterday, for example, there was a lot of media that made some sort of moral equivalence between the hostages, the children held hostage in Gaza, and the prisoners released from Israeli jails. So Israel is losing. Every day that this war continues, Hamas gets more and more, not support, but at least Gaza gets more support. And that's what Hamas is looking for.